5 and 6, I've got another story for you from Rescue, and today it's about a girl who fell down a well, and the girl is called Jessica McClure. Sometimes the most ordinary places can turn out to be the most dangerous ones. When little Jessica McClure was playing with friends in her aunt's garden one Wednesday morning, no one had expected the toddler to slip and fall down an old, disused well. The well was deep but extremely narrow, and for a while it was impossible to know that the 18-month-old girl had survived the fall. In fact, Jessica had become trapped about 7 metres below the surface, but when she first disappeared, her parents, Chip and Sissy, couldn't hear or see anything down in the dark shaft. The emergency services were called and help arrived almost immediately. Neighbours, family, police and fire crews all crowded into the garden in the Texas town of Midland, desperately hoping that the little girl was all right. A special microphone on a long lead was slowly lowered into the mouth of the well, and the people standing around were told to keep quiet. Everyone strained to hear a sound, any sound, from deep underground. At first there was nothing, and Chip and Sissy began to fear the worst. It was only when the microphone at last picked up a tiny, frightened voice that they knew that Jessica was alive. Even then no one knew how, or even if it would be possible to get her out of the deep well. The well shaft was only about 20 centimetres wide, and luckily it was no longer full of water. A small video camera was lowered down after the microphone, and the pictures showed that Jessica was firmly wedged in a slight bend in the shaft. She was only a few metres from safety, but the shaft was too narrow for anyone to reach her or go down and lift her out. The obvious solution seemed to be to make the hole bigger, but this was quickly ruled out as a possibility. The well was surrounded by solid rock. Digging it out would take too long. Time was a crucial factor, because Jessica wouldn't be able to survive for long without food or water. But if the rescue team used heavy machinery to do the work more quickly, she would be at a great risk from falling rocks. As the day wore on, there was still no sign of a firm rescue plan. Television crews and reporters began arriving in Midland to cover the story. As darkness fell, powerful floodlights were switched on around the well, and by the following morning, millions of Americans were watching the scene and waiting nervously for some news. Everyone wanted to see the little girl emerge from the hole, happy and smiling, but nobody in the garden seemed quite know what to do. Most of the area around this part of West Texas is mining country, and at the time of Jessica's accident, many people in Midland had jobs in the oil industry. Extracting oil from underground involved drilling large, deep holes called oil wells. This meant that there was lots of professional mining engineers living and working locally. Several of them raced into Midland in the hope that they could help the police and fire departments devise a way to rescue little Jessica McClure. Even with so many experts on hand, it took a while to work out the best course of action. Eventually, it was decided to drill a second shaft alongside the well, and then to dig a tunnel from one shaft to the other. If the second shaft was made wider than the well, it would be possible for someone to go down it and then bring Jessica along the tunnel and back up to the surface. The idea sounded like it might work, but it was very risky. Even with the best equipment the oil industry could supply, it would still take many hours to penetrate the solid rock. A machine known as a rat hole rig could do the work, but it was important to avoid drilling too close to the well or to Jessica, as she would still be in danger from any dislodged falling rocks. This meant the connecting tunnel would have to be longer and take longer to dig, but no one could think of a better way to rescue her. Oxygen was piped down the well to help Jessica breathe, and on the second day, members of the rescue team could hear her singing softly into the microphone. The song they heard was one of her favourites, from Winnie the Pooh. This was really good news. It showed she was still conscious, although it wasn't possible to tell if she was injured, and if so, how badly. As the noisy drilling machines began to work, Jessica's mother spent the time singing along with her daughter. Sissy hoped that hearing these familiar nursery rhymes would take Jessica's mind off how cold and hungry she was, and how long she'd been trapped down the hole. Sometimes Jessica sounded quite happy, but at other times she cried out for her mother. After nearly 2 days and a night underground, she was becoming dangerously dehydrated, and she must have been terribly lonely. As the time ticked away, Jessica cried more and more, only stopping when she fell asleep for a while. Although the sleep would do her good, the silence was more disturbing for everyone waiting on the surface. At least when Jessica was crying or singing, they knew she was alive. The situation was becoming more and more desperate. Without being able to eat or drink, Jessica was growing weaker. Her parents were also worried that if she lost even a small amount of weight, it would increase the danger of her slipping further and further down the well. If that happened, it would be impossible to get her out. The plight of the poor trapped girl was now headline news. Around the world, churches were holding vigils for Jessica, and millions of strangers were praying for her safe recovery. As night fell at the end of the second day, the police were still unable to say how long it might take to bring her out. After a team of mining engineers had spent all night drilling, it was decided that the second shaft was deep enough. Now, 10 metres down, the really hard work could begin, and miners began digging out a tunnel by hand to connect the shaft to the well. This was done by a team of men taking turns down the hole. Each one had to lie flat on his stomach and use a powered chisel known as a jackhammer to cut through the solid rock. This part of the operation was guided by a government mining expert who had flown all the way to Texas to help. He said the tunnel must be angled so that it entered the well below the place where Jessica was stuck. This would prevent any debris dropping on her and avoid the very real risk of her becoming dislodged as the men broke through the wall of the well. Everything possible had to be done to minimise the danger of the child falling further and further down the shaft. The work was tough and exhausting, even for the men who were used to digging underground. The second shaft was only 76 centimetres wide, and conditions at the bottom were cramped and uncomfortable. In the dark, sweltering heat, the diggers had to work as fast as possible, but also extremely carefully. Any sudden movement or vibration from the heavy jackhammers could cause the sides of the well to fall in on Jessica. It took until Friday for the hard-working tunnellers to break through to the well, and it was getting dark again by the time the hole was large enough to reach Jessica. Getting this far had taken a massive team effort and more than 58 hours. Now the final stage of the rescue fell to a specialist paramedic, Robert O'Donnell. Under the floodlight's glare, he inched his way slowly through the narrow opening before carefully lifting the exhausted child to safety. Jessica had been alone in the dark for 3 days and 2 nights, an ordeal that for a while made her the most famous baby in the world. She had cuts and bruises from the fall, and she'd need an operation to amputate a badly damaged toe. She had also lost nearly a fifth of her body weight and was dangerously dehydrated. Fortunately, she went on to make a full recovery, and she now lives a normal life with 2 children of her own, in a house just a couple of miles away from the well that nearly killed her. So what an extraordinary tale of rescue of a little girl who must have been really, really scared, but thankfully it had a happy ending. See you next time for another one.